Hey everyone, my name is Jeffrey, and welcome to today's session on exploring Data Wrangler in VS Code. Today we'll be using the free Data Wrangler extension for VS Code to explore, analyze, and clean a data set of Airbnb listings in Seattle. And throughout the journey, we'll be checking out how Data Wrangler will help increase the productivity of data scientists and increase the learnings that you get from your data set. So to start off, I'm in VS Code right now, my favorite editor. And I do have the Data Wrangler extension already installed, as you can see right here. You can find this in the VS Code Marketplace. And I also have a Jupyter Notebook open. And I have pandas loaded, as well as the Airbnb dataset as a CSV loaded into my notebook as well. So one way to invoke Data Wrangler from the notebook is if you have a data frame, such as df here, which is my Airbnb dataset. If I just type df.head, or anything that prints out the data frame, you'll see this new open data frame or whatever your variable is in Data Wrangler button in the style status bar. So feel free to click at this anytime, and this will open up the Data Wrangler extension. When you first launch Data Wrangler, you'll see a really rich interface of your data. So you can see this is the Airbnb data set. You'll see at the top all the columns at the top. It'll tell you as well additional information such as what is the data type of the column, any missing or distinct values, and what the percentage of it is relative to the overall data set. Depending on the data type as well, you'll see the summary statistics or what the representation is, an histogram of the distribution of the data. So for numeric columns, you can see distribution. For string columns, you'll just see how many distinct values there are. If there's any columns like object columns, you'll see also the frequency. So you can see how many of each item appears in the column as well. You'll also see at the top a data shape summary, so you can see how much data you have. And on the left-hand side, you'll get a data summary of what are all the columns, which of the columns have missing values, etc. So firstly, let's take a look at what we can do with the data set. So let's quickly look through the data. We can see, you can do some really basic filtering and sorts. So let's say we want to look exclusively at the Queen Anne neighborhood here. I see there's a lot of them. We can actually just invoke a filter right here by clicking on the three dots at the top right. We can click Add Filter. Let's say equal to, and let's just say Queen Anne. And we can see as I'm doing this live, Data Wrangler automatically updates the view and the grid to only contain the information that I'm providing here. So you can see it's only Queen Anne now, and we can see we've filtered it down. And all these stats update live as I'm actually updating the filter. So that's great as well. Let's just undo this filter because we want to look at all the data set. But if we recall, when we go back into our full data summary, we can see there's a lot of missing values in some of the columns, such as square footage. We want to find where square footage is because this is a pretty big data set. We can actually just use this go to column feature. It shows everything. If I can just search for the word square feet, and we'll jump nicely to this column. So I think because we want to do a little bit more exploring and a little bit more data cleaning and analyzing, we'll want to switch from this viewing mode, which is what Data Wrangler opens by default, into editing mode. So viewing mode kind of lets you explore the data really quickly, apply some like basic sorts of filters, look at the data, look at the distribution of the data as we did earlier. But if you want to do any more cleaning or any manipulation of the data sets, we'll want to go into editing mode where you can leverage a lot of Data Wrangler's built-in operations to do such. So now that I'm in editing mode, you'll see a couple things change. So one thing you'll see is now this new operations panel on the left-hand side, top left. What this does is this showcases all of the Data Wrangler's built-in operations that you can apply. So they're all grouped by category of operation. And you'll see in a minute of how I can actually use these operations to help with cleaning the data set in a much faster manner than just writing code. The left-hand side, you'll also see a new panel called Cleaning Steps. And again, this will be self-explanatory when you see it in a minute. But as you're applying operations and doing different transformations to your data set, you'll see this start to populate with the different steps that you actually did. So you can keep, it's kind of like a history. You can keep track of everything you did. And the bottom side here, you'll see, and again, in a minute, this will show a live preview and automatically generate the code required to make that transformation. So let's get back into it. So like I mentioned earlier, square footage was one of the columns that we saw that had a lot of missing values, and we can confirm that here. When we look at the missing, we'll see 97% of values are missing here. So we'll probably want to, generally rule of thumb, like this is a lot of columns. We can't really, a lot of missing values. We can't really impute many of these because there's just so many that are missing. So it might be just easier to get rid of this column. So one way we can do that is we can click on the top right side. We can click drop columns. Here showcases some of the most commonly used operations, but if you want to get access to all of them, it's that operation panel you saw on the left. So when you actually invoke an operation here, which is I'm dropping columns here, you'll see a few things change. So you'll see a diff of the view. So if folks are familiar with GitHub, this is kind of like a diff of what's actually happening to the data. This one's a pretty simple one because we're just dropping the column. So it highlights everything that's going to be removed in red and changed in green. So this, in this case, it's just dropping the column. So you'll see everything is red. You'll also see this code was automatically generated by Data Wrangler as well. So it gives you, you can also look at the code to make sure that's doing the correct operation. And if everything looks good to you, you can click apply. And once I click apply, you'll see that that column no longer exists in my data set, as well as you'll see this new drop columns in my cleaning step. So again, this is what I mentioned earlier, where as you're cleaning the data, you'll see this start to populate. Another thing we can do is if we look back into the missing values, we'll see review scores rating also had a good amount of missing values, so we want to handle that. So let's find that by searching for review score ratings here. And this one only has, we're looking at 17%. So most of the data is pretty clean here. Most of the data is intact. So we'll actually probably want to keep this column or most of the data in this column. So what we can do is, again, you can see some of the missing values here. We'll want to just, instead of dropping the entire column, we can handle some of these missing values. So we can say, one thing we can do is we can just drop the missing values. There's other strategies as well, but in this case, we'll just drop the values that are non-existent. So what's great is we can see as I go into my preview of the operation, you'll see all the columns that are actually being dropped, or sorry, all the rows that are being dropped highlighted in red. So it gives you a very visual indicator of what's actually happening to your data. And again, you'll see the code automatically being generated at the bottom. And you'll see a new set of column statistics on your data. So you can now see if I applied this, the missing values become 0. So if everything looks good to me here, I can click, go ahead and click apply. So now that I've done the review scores rating, we'll see there's still a few missing values, but there's not as much anymore. So we'll for the sake of time, we'll get into exploring some of the data set as well. So let's look at the price column because as an Airbnb data set, a lot of us when we're booking Airbnbs, we care a lot about the price of the place. And that's one thing I think we'll want to analyze in this data set and see how price compares to different bedrooms, bathrooms, different neighborhoods, as we saw some of the other data in the data set. One thing we'll notice is that price is actually an object, and this is likely because you'll see like there's a $ here, there's also dots here, so it's not fully represented as a number. And which is also why we're not getting this histogram. So we'll want to convert this from like a human readable price to something that's more machine readable that's just a raw value. Typically, if you're doing this outside Data Wrangler, you probably have to write some code to figure out how to remove the $ as well as the dots. But because the numbers are not standardized, right? You might have like hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, etc. It's not as trivial, and you'll have to probably look up online. Data Wrangler actually has this really cool built operation called by example. So we can do string transform by example here. And what this does, it's if folks are familiar with Excel here, it's very similar to Excel where it tries to recognize a pattern that you give and tries to impute the rest of the values. So in this case, we're going to be creating a new column by example. Let's say price cleaned, since we're cleaning up the price here. And then it says enter an example. So let's just say we want to extract 85 from this. It tries to impute the rest of it. It gives this question mark because it's not fully sure on this one. It gives, so it's saying, hey, enter another example. And we can see here it didn't do it correctly. It thought I was trying to pull just the first 2 numbers of everything. So here I'm going to update the example and set it to 150. And now you can see, because of these 2 examples, it's able to smartly impute the rest of what it should be deriving based on these 2 examples it gave. So you can see now it's like 975 for this, but it still remembers that if it's just 80, then, or if it's just 2 digits, it'll pull that out as well. And again, the best part is you'll see, because we're in Data Wrangler, it automatically generates the code for you and provides that transparency or trust to you as the user. So you know exactly what it's doing. It's not behind some sort of black box here. And you'll see exactly what it's doing. So you can see it's finding, it's the index, it's finding all the values between the $ and the dot. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do here. So if everything looks good, and again, this is a little preview mode. If everything looks good, I can click apply. And now you'll see this is part of my data set as a new column. And now that I've added this price clean, I probably don't need this original price anymore. So I'm going to drop this column. And again, something similar I did earlier. And one thing I'll notice is I still don't see this histogram, and it's because this price clean is still an object because I'm just extracting at this value. So I want to convert this with this change column type operation from object to, there's a lot of different types here, but let's just say float 32 as an example. And again, here you can see the diff that's happening. So you can see that this is the previous column, and this is what's actually going to be added or what's going to be changed. You can see it's changing out the float, and now we'll start to see that histogram here. So if that looks good, we'll click apply. And now we can kind of see some more data about the price. So we can see the minimum price here is $22 a night for an Airbnb, and the maximum price is around $1,000, which is pretty expensive. We can see the average is probably around here. So if I want to see more information about price clean, I can actually click on this column, and it now focuses the summary on this specific column, and it gives me more information. So I can see things like the mean price or the standard deviation, the minimum price, etc. And so if you want to see a specific data on a specific column, you just click that column and it updates it here. But if you want to go back, you can unselect it and you can see the data summary of everything. But yeah, $1,000 a night, it's pretty nice. So let's just quickly sort it, just for my own curiosity's sake, to see maybe what this place is. So if I look through, so now we can see this is the $1,000 a night place. We can see that it's a 4-person place. There's only 1 bathroom, 2 bedrooms. I don't know if it deserves $1,000 a night. It is a house though, so it is pretty big. And we can see it's the neighborhood of Ravenna. But one thing I also noticed is that this column says availability 365, which kind of represents how many nights of the year in the last 365 years it's actually available. And we can see it's available for almost all the year. So I think this person likely overpriced their Airbnb. And that's why there's just so many nights that it's available. So that's another cool or interesting thing we're already learning from this data set. One thing we'll also want to do is, given that, we can see some of the availability is 0, which means it's just not available to book at all. I think if we want to get an accurate representation of the data, we can actually filter out anything that's available for 0 nights, which means it's just fully booked out, or that person's just not even providing or listing this Airbnb, or something that's available like every single day, which basically means that it's just probably overpriced and nobody wants it. So let's just say greater than as the condition and say greater than 0. And then we can also add another filter. We can say availability 365 again, and we can say, let's say less than 365. So again, as you can see, as I'm typing live, it's updating both the code live and the data grid live. So you can see what's actually happening with your data set very interactively. So here I'm just removing everything. I can click apply, and now we can see the max and min has updated here. So now that the price is being cleaned and we're getting rid of some of the outliers for the availability, let's see how the price, let's see how like things like the, let's say property type affect the price. So we can do a classic group by over here. So let's select property type. Let's go and search for a group by and aggregate. And let's aggregate on price. So price clean, that's the operation that's the column we just added. And by default, it does count. And what count is just showing you how many of these property types there are. So we can see super quickly, let's just bring this down here. We can see most of them, at least from what I see, most of the property types here are apartments, of course. I'm sure that's probably what's the most abundant. We'll see the second most is houses, and we can also see a distribution of some of the more interesting or unique things. So let's just click apply here. And let's see what else there is. So there's also things such as campers, RVs. There's a boat. There's 3 boats, which is kind of cool. So maybe we'll look into that a little bit more. We can also see like some tree houses, townhouses as well. So this is kind of interesting to see like the distribution of what people are actually offering in Seattle. But I did count earlier. I actually want to see if any of these property types change by price. So instead of count, what we can do is, let's say you already committed an operation as I did before. I can actually jump back to any of these previous operations at any time, and I can go edit it. So here I'm going back to the group by and aggregate, and instead of count, let's just say I want to get the mean. So what's the average price for each of these property types? So you can see here now, I can see the average price of a condo. Not surprisingly, it's probably more expensive than an apartment. Here's the average price of a house. It's $130 a night. And we can see the boat obviously is by far the most expensive at $513 a night as well. So some more interesting facts about our data. Another thing we might want to do is instead of, so let's just click update. So now we can see, I just updated the previous operation, but I actually want to aggregate. We saw something like the neighborhood as well, right? So not just property type might affect the price of the Airbnb, but also the neighborhood of where it's at. So we're going to kind of check that out. So we can actually just delete the previous operation by just clicking this. And if we recall, there's this neighborhood column here. So let's just group by this neighborhood column instead of the property type and see how that actually affects price. So again, I can click on neighborhood. I can do group by and aggregate again. And we'll aggregate on price one more time. And by default, it's count again. So we can see count just gives us a really good distribution of where all the neighborhoods are, or where the most common neighborhoods are for Airbnbs. So if we want to do this, we can actually just click apply, sort descending, just to make it look easier. So we can see that most of the Airbnbs are going to be Capitol Hill. These are, if you're not familiar with Seattle, these are some of the more centrally located places. And again, I think the lower values, if I just scroll all the way down, like these are kind of places that are a little bit further away from the city. So again, another thing we can do is, like I mentioned earlier, is we'll want to change from count again to mean, so we can see the average price rather than just the number. And so we can kind of see what is kind of like the most expensive areas, right? So if I scroll down, or if I sort by descending, we can see this neighborhood of Portage Bay as well as Westlake have the most expensive average Airbnbs per night. And again, if I scroll down, we can see where some of the cheaper ones are per night as well. So let's just go back. And another thing we'll want to do is, we saw earlier that there are bathrooms and bedrooms as well. So we want to see maybe how the neighborhood affects bathrooms and bedrooms. So let's just say we can also, instead of just aggregating on one column, we can say, let's say bedrooms here. And instead of count again, we'll go back to mean, which is going to represent the average number of bedrooms for neighborhood. And we can do the same for bathrooms. So let's say mean. And again, we can see, again, this all update live as I'm making these modifications, as well as the code updating live. So this is just one of the benefits of using Data Wrangler is, rather than just working in a notebook where you don't really know what's happening until you actually execute the code and you've got to write some extra code to visualize it all, Data Wrangler is kind of just doing it automatically for you as you interact with the data with the UI. So again, if after this aggregation, we can kind of see Alki, this neighborhood of Alki has around maybe 1.8 bedrooms, right, on average, and 1.3 bathrooms, but we can see maybe somewhere that's smaller, like this neighborhood, only has an average of just 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom in the neighborhood. So again, it gives you just additional information. Of course, you can just write this group by on your own, but this just makes it a lot easier to visualize and do within Data Wrangler. So let's just update this. And these numbers right now, because I'm sure, let's see, these were float 64, so we have a lot of different decimal places. We want to clean this up a little bit. So let's actually round all of these. So we can go into our operations, numeric, because these are number columns, and we have some operations, built-in operations to help round the numbers to make it easier to view. So let's go into round, and let's say we want to set it to 2 decimal places, right? And again, we can see this update live. You can see this is going from this super long number into a rounded 2 decimal place number. Here, obviously, there's just 1, so it's going to go there. And again, get the code for it, and we can click apply. So we can see how quickly we went from just this massive data set into something that's a lot more readable and gives a lot more information to your eyes in a much nicer viewing way of rounded numbers rather than the whole super long number as well. So if this looks good, you can also export it as well. But one last thing I want to showcase, I'm just going to undo some of the previous things we did, is if we want to actually do any machine learning on this as well, we'll want to convert some of the text into numbers, something that's machine readable. So one example of this is this host is superhost column. This is supposed to represent true and false to tell you if that host is a superhost or not. But T and F are not easily represented to a computer. So I want to convert this to a number. So we'll have this operation under formulas called one hot encode, and this is a very common operation to convert your numeric or your string columns to actually, or categorical columns, sorry, to a number column. And what you can see now, what one hot encode does is it's going to change, like it's going to create 2 columns out of this, and it's going to set it to 1 if it's false for that column, or 1 if it's true for that column. So you can see here the true becomes 1 here, it becomes 0, and removes that original column. So I can click apply, and now this makes it a lot easier for me to do apply any machine learning algorithms to this as well. So we did a lot today. There was a lot. I think there's also a lot of operations that we still didn't go through. If I just open a lot of these operations, well, you'll see a lot of different string operations we can do, like capitalizing the text, any date type formatting as well. We can also calculate text length. There's also some schema operations. So if you want to clone or duplicate your column, rename the column as well. So a lot of different operations that Data Wrangler supports. And if there's an operation you want to do that's not built in, you can also just start typing code. So if I want to remove this ID column because this just seems like it's the Airbnb ID, I can just even take this example, right? I can do df equals df.drop columns equals ID. Oh, there's, sorry, Peggy, there was one, I think there's like a bug that just, so if there's an operation that's not supported here on Data Wrangler as well, we can also always type in any operation as well. So if there's any operations that you want to write, if you just want to write Python code as well, you can type Python code here and it'll automatically update live in the grid. So earlier we just saw a bunch of operations that you can do that Data Wrangler does support. But if there aren't any operations, or if there's something custom you want to write, or an operation that's not built in, supported by Data Wrangler right now, you can also just enter this box and just type in any piece of code that you would like. And anytime you write code here, it'll automatically reflect live in this grid as well. So again, you get the same benefits of Data Wrangler of having it very interactive, showing you what's happening to the data, but you can choose to whether to write code if you prefer that, or you can use one of the built-in operations and interact with the UI as well. So once we accomplished a lot of different steps today. We can see we did like 9 different steps, not even including the ones that we undid or deleted or changed. But once they're kind of done, we can quickly take a look as a sanity check of previewing everything we did earlier. So we can see all the pieces of code that we wrote or had Data Wrangler write for us. All the different operations also very nicely commented as well. So if you don't exactly remember what you did based on the code, it'll tell you in human readable text of what's actually happening. If everything looks good to you, we can jump to the export menu at the very top. So you'll see there's different ways we can actually bring this back. Because if you recall from the very beginning of our talk, we started within a Jupyter Notebook to get to this data set. But there's different ways to go back to the notebook or export somewhere else as well, if you'd like. So the common one is to export to notebook, which will bring this piece of code back to the notebook. There's also export as file. So let's say you started off with a data frame, but you wanted to save it as like a CSV file or give it to a coworker working with Excel. You can do that as well. Or we can just copy all this code with this button and you can paste it into GitHub. You can paste it as a Python file as well, but there's different ways to export all of this. But the main artifact or the thing that you're generating with Data Wrangler is that piece of code or the data as well. So in this case, if we want to jump back to the notebook, we can just quickly click export to notebook. And boom, we're just back into that cell right after we launched Data Wrangler in. And you'll see it generates a piece of comment saying that, hey, this was generated by Data Wrangler, but also puts it into a very nice, clean function. So we can see everything that we saw earlier, puts in a nice, clean function, creates a copy of it. So again, we're not modifying that original data set. So once you're in Data Wrangler, you don't have to worry about deleting anything or making any changes because we're modifying a copy of the data set. It kind of facilitates or lets you explore the data without having to worry about making any unwanted modifications or destructive modifications as well. And now in the data set, we can just quickly run the code again, and we'll get the latest data or the clean data. But that was in a nutshell of exploring Data Wrangler in VS Code. As a recap, we started with a notebook in VS Code today. We had an Airbnb data set of different Airbnb listings in Seattle. We loaded that into our notebook. We opened Data Wrangler with the Launch Data Wrangler button. And then once in Data Wrangler, we did a lot of exploration. We looked through the different columns of data. We cleaned up the data, so we removed a lot of the missing values. We also tried to convert some of the types of data, right? So if you remember the price, it had like that $sign, so we cleaned it up as well. We tried to do some one-hot encoding as well as some group bys. And then we finally, once everything was good, we exported it back into the notebook and we get that piece of code here and we can continue on with what we're doing. And of course, you can always enter Data Wrangler anytime within the notebook as well. But this is just in a nutshell of what we can do with Data Wrangler. So thank you everyone for joining my session. And if you'd like to learn more about Data Wrangler, it's free to download on the VS Code Marketplace by searching for the keyword Data Wrangler as well. Or if you want to learn more about the documentation or anything, you can just go to aka.ms/Data Wrangler. So thank you, everyone.